मैं चार्टा क्लास अच्छी इंटरव्यू क्लास So, welcome to Banik. We are discussing about the World Trade Organization. We have already discussed its creation, the purpose for which it was created, its structure, and today we will discuss about the Ministerial Conference. As we already discussed, the Ministerial Conference is the highest decision making body of WTO. Fine. And normally it consists of the trade and commerce ministers from member countries. Okay, and this as per the WTO charter, it meets at least once in 2 years interval. Fine, because they are the trade and commerce ministers in their respective countries, so they cannot be full time present at the WTO headquarter. So the Ministerial Conference, which is the highest decision making body of WTO, its session normally is held at 2 years interval, and the major decisions regarding WTO a policy matter are taken at the Ministerial Conference. Fine. Since the establishment of the organization in 1995 till 2021, so till date you can say, so 12 ministerial conferences have taken place, and the first, so how many? So there are ministerial conferences, they have taken place. Fine. And the first conference was held at Singapore in 1996. Okay. And this conference was very popular because the famous Singapore issue was raised here. They called as the Singapore issue. Okay, this is the first conference after the organization was created. Although the organization was created in 1995, but the next year the first ministerial conference was held, and at this conference, so the developed countries, they tried to introduce new issues to the organization, and trade facilitation number 4. So these 4 issues were introduced or are supposed to be introduced, or the developed countries, they tried to introduce these new issues to the WTO forum at the first ministerial conference. So these 4 were popularly known as the Singapore issue. What they are? So this at times comes as a question. So regarding, especially in the preliminary, regarding the Singapore issue covers, so agreement on investment, disagreement among the developed and developing countries, because by the time when the first conference took place and the developed country brought these Singapore issues to the WTO forum, the developing countries, so they initially emphasize on first implement the issues which were the formative issues, or which are there already in the WTO charter, and then after the proper implementation of the original issues, okay, which is beneficial for both, then new issues can be taken into consideration. But the developed countries, for their own interest, promoting their own interest, they try to add new issues. So that is why they are opposed. So the Singapore issues raised at the first conference so remain unresolved, because the developing countries, they oppose this, rather they emphasize on the implementation of the original policy or original draft of the WTO, which was implemented from the previous year 1995, okay, by the Marrakesh agreement. So the first conference was, if you go by the conference wise, it is the first conference Singapore in 1996. Fine. And this is important because from the preliminary point of view, so question comes, what are the Singapore issue? The Singapore issue are the issues raised by the developed country at the first ministerial conference of WTO, covering agreement on investment, competition policy, transparency in government procurement, and trade facilitation. So which are definitely much advanced than the parameter of the developing countries. Okay. So, are much more advanced than the standard followed by the developing countries. That is why, so it was not possible on their part to implement these issues, so they opposed it, because these things are to the benefit of the developed countries, not to the benefit of the developing countries. So, because it is not at all of any help to them or a benefit to them, and the implementation issue remain unresolved of the original text, so they oppose it, and that is why this issue remain unresolved at the first ministerial conference. Fine. So, moving further, the second conference was held at Geneva, that is the WTO headquarters in Switzerland. Fine. The second ministerial conference, it was held in 1998. So, first 1996, after 2 years, okay, the second conference at Geneva. Geneva is the headquarters of WTO. Fine. Not much issues were discussed at this, just a formal meeting of the members to discuss about the procedural matters. Okay. The third conference was held at Seattle. Seattle is a place in USA. Fine. And it was held in 1999 December. Okay. Although 1990 it was the second summit or second conference, but at the end of 1999, okay, that is in December 1999, the third conference was held at Seattle. Okay. And the Seattle conference witnessed some demonstrations and some clash between the developed and developing countries, but not much issues of benefit to the sides were taken into consideration at the third ministerial conference. But the fourth conference is important, which was held in 2001 at Doha in Qatar. Fine. The fourth ministerial conference was held in November 2001, that is at Doha in Qatar, and here issue like multilateral regimes and investment, competition policy, trade facilitations, okay, all were again discussed, environmental issue, but the most important development or agreement that was reached at the fourth ministerial conference was the TRIPS agreement on public health. Fine. So, this is important, this comes as a question also. So, which agreement was reached at the Doha conference? It was the TRIPS agreement on public health. So, TRIPS stands for trade related intellectual property rights. Fine. So, what is trade related intellectual property right? As you know, we have discussed while covering WTO that IPR or intellectual property right. Okay. So, IPR consists of patent, copyright, trademark, industrial design and geographical indicators. Okay. So, here, because when WTO came into being, apart from trade in goods, trade in services and trade in IPR also were added to WTO forum. So, this agreement, the TRIPS agreement on public health was signed, which permitted the developing countries to manufacture some patented drugs on public health emergency. So, try to understand this particular concept because it is very important, and because it has relevance in the ongoing pandemic that started in 2019, the COVID pandemic. Because, so normally in the global scenario, the patent of some important medicines, some life saving drugs are with the multinational drug companies. They operate globally, and the poor countries are unable to afford those medicines because of their cost. The exorbitant price of those drugs make the people in the underdeveloped and developing countries to access it because of the too costly they being. Fine. And this agreement was somehow a relief for the developing country and the poor countries. How this is? Because this agreement, the TRIPS agreement public health, authorized or it permitted the uh, developing countries, the poor countries, to give compulsory licensing to some of their drug manufacturing company, pharma manufacturing company, to produce a particular drug whose patent is with the multinational company on public health emergency. Okay, is that clear? So I am repeating it again. Okay, on public health emergency. Okay, which condition? On public health emergency. Fine. Suppose a particular disease is becoming endemic. Okay. So in a particular country, that and the medicine for that is with a multinational pharmaceutical company, and neither the people can afford it, nor the government can distribute it by purchasing it. Fine. In that circumstances, the government of that country, as per this TRIPS agreement on public health, okay, it allowed the government of WTO member countries to give what? Okay. So that is the most important agreement, because you know that this is a beneficial agreement for the developing countries or the poor countries, because the medicine which they are unable to access till date because of its exorbitant cost. Okay, right now they can produce it on health emergency and distribute that life saving drugs in their own healthcare system, okay, which will be beneficial. Okay, so remember this one, and you can say this, why this is important, because in the pandemic period, so country like India, we produce this vaccines and distribute it to so many countries. Okay, and the vaccines no doubt were researched by foreign companies. Okay, so this was also discussed, that the patent held by the multinational company can be some foregone for a particular period to provide this medicine to other people in different countries. This was discussed during the pandemic period. Fine. This is the major outcome of the 4th Ministerial Conference that was held in 2001 at Doha, and this is a big achievement for the developing and underdeveloped member countries of WTO. Fine. Then moving further, so coming to the next, the 5th conference was held at Cancun in Mexico. Okay, but not much development or outcomes were credited to this particular conference. It went off peacefully. Fine. And the next meeting, the 6th one, was held at Hong Kong, that's in year 2005. Okay, and it was attended by 149 members, because the membership was increased considerably by this. Here consensus was reached between the developed and developing countries on a number of issues, like the issues raised at the Singapore. Okay, trade facilitation, government procurement, the new issues which were raised at the first conference, the Singapore issues. So there is consensus among the developed and the developing countries over these issues, okay, which you can say is a better development for the organization, because somehow after much stand up for nearly from 1996 till 2005, for 10 years, the countries were able to negotiate and reach at consensus which are beneficial for all. Okay. So the 7th conference was held at Geneva, that is in Switzerland, the headquarters of WTO. Fine. In November 2009, and the general theme being WTO, the multilateral trade system and the current global economic environment. So by that time, by 2009, so the world was going through two major crises, like the American crisis, which was transformed to the global financial crisis, and the Eurozone crisis. Fine. The recession, the global recession starting from USA, the subprime crisis of USA, and the sovereign debt crisis of the European Union countries were at its peak. during this period. So, WTO being the global trading organization, so trade was affected due to the recessionary trend around the world, so also spreading into the European Union, the much developed domain of the world, the European Union. They was affected by this recessionary trend, which was known as the sovereign debt crisis. So, at WTO forum, the global economic environment was a topic of discussion. Okay, how to find solution to overcome this particular situation, how the recessionary trend can be overcome by both the European Union, the Eurozone countries, as well as by the global community through combined efforts that were discussed. Because when a country is in recession, one country or few countries are in recession, steps can be taken by the international community, but when majority are in a same process, like you see in Europe, the entire Eurozone is affected, and the American recession spread to the world and became the global recessionary trend. Okay, starting from 2006 till 2009 onward, this continued. So, at the global world forum, so the topic of economic environment, okay, the current global economic environment was a topic of discussion, okay, and they try to find solution to this, how to expand the trade, and expansion of trade needs manufacturing development, and manufacturing development needs boosting the economy, and that can be possible only through stimulus packages given by the government of the country, if it is possible. Like in case of USA, the American government so provided the stimulus and bailout packages to their financial institutions to restart their business. But in European Union, the government being facing financial crisis, it was unable to help their entities in financial matters. So, they have to depend upon the international lenders like the IMF, the World Bank, and the European Central Bank and other countries to overcome the recessionary trend. Fine. And the global community discuss about the steps necessary for overcoming the then prevailing global and economic environment, how to improve or how to ameliorate the situation and bring improvement in the global manufacturing, global trade, and if both manufacturing and trade comes to its normal position, recession will automatically went away. Fine. And that is the 7th Ministerial Conference. Fine. Then moving further, the 8th conference was held at Geneva, the WTO headquarters, in 2011, and no substantial issue were discussed at this 8th conference, except the joining of some new members as to the WTO forum. Fine. The 8th conference was of not much importance in the WTO history. Fine. Then the 9th conference was held in December 2013 at Bali, Indonesia, where agreement on agriculture. Fine. You see, this is again important. Okay, what? The agreement of agriculture. Okay, like domestic support, market access, and export subsidy was the major issue of discussion. Okay, you see, the year was 2013. Okay, and the topic was so agreement on agriculture, AOA. Agreement on agriculture, not it is agreement on agriculture. Fine. So popularly called as AOA, agreement on agriculture. Okay. So as per the agreement on agriculture, so this is a topic, this is a agreement regarding agricultural product pricing. Fine. Because agricultural items are a major item of export around the world. So the pricing and the government interference in the pricing of agricultural products is a major concern at WTO forum, and the AOA put the condition that no country can fix the price of more than 10% of its total agricultural products. Am I clear? So I am repeating it again. So as per the AOA, the government of no member country of WTO can fix more than 10%. Fix the price of not more than 10% of the total agricultural products of the country. That means suppose a country A, it produces 100 metric ton of total agriculture products. Fine. So it's 10%. The government can only fix the price of only 10% of this. That means only on 10 metric ton the government can fix the price, and the rest 90 metric ton the price will be fixed by the market forces of demand and supply. The government cannot interfere in deciding the price of the rest 90%. This is as per the agreement on agriculture. Fine. But why this came to, this was an old agreement, but why in 2013 at the Bali conference or the 9th conference, this topic was at WTO? Because in the same year, so this is only for India. Why? You know, in 2013 at our level, at Government of India, we passed the National Food Security Act. Fine. So what it is called as the National Food Security Act 2013 was passed by the then UPA government. The Congress-led UPA government passed the National Food Security Act to expand the coverage of food security to 75% of the rural people and 50% of the urban people in India. Okay, you know, India runs the largest food security program in the world through the PDS. Okay, in the revised system of food security, Government of India decided to expand it. Its means sphere. Okay, the expansion of this program, government want to expand it. So Government of India passed the National Food Security Act. As per the provision of this National Food Security Act, Government of India decided to provide subsidized food grain to 75% of the rural people and 50% of 50% of the urban people. Fine. So in this situation, so Government of India is to procure much more food grain to the national reserve to provide in the Food Security Act, and that is much more than the WTO agreement on agriculture limit of 10%. Fine. As the government procurement will definitely exceed more than 10% fixed by the agreement on agriculture. So this topic was brought before WTO that it is a violation of the agreement on agriculture. The Indian Act, which is India being a very proactive member of WTO, passage of this National Food Security Act was considered as a violation of the agreement on agriculture by India. So the issue was raised at WTO, but India and like some other countries supported Indian National Food Security Act, and you know the peace clause was used. Okay, what? Peace clause. This come as a question. This peace clause was a question in OCS examination. Okay, peace clause normally comes to our mind that it must be the United Nations, but no, it is WTO. After the peace clause, so a country can get relaxation on AOA for a certain period. If a country violates AOA on humanitarian issue or its national requirement, so as per the peace clause, this can get enjoy some relaxation for some period, and this peace clause is used by India for its exceeding the agreement on agriculture clause of WTO, and this was discussed at the Bali conference or the 9th conference held at Bali in 2013. Okay, that's very, very important. Okay, because a particular Indian law was discussed because it violated some of the agreements of WTO. Fine. So hope this you understand better, because this is of wider ramification to Indian government policy, because government of India's food security called the National Food Security Act, okay, and our National Food Security Mission. So, are violative of the WTO's agreement on agriculture, fine. And because we violated, so India was dragged to WTO on this particular issue, and this issue was discussed at WTO, and India was allowed to use the peace clause to overcome this limitation set on this, fine. Then the 10th conference was held in 2015 at Nairobi in Kenya, which culminated in the adoption of the Nairobi package, okay. Again what? The 10th conference was held in 2015, okay, at Nairobi in Kenya, the African country, okay, and resulted in the adoption of the Nairobi package, fine. A series of decisions on agriculture, cotton and issue related to least developed countries. So, same agriculture, because since the beginning of WTO, agriculture remained a major contentious issue between the developed and developing countries, because when WTO was created, so the developing countries and the underdeveloped countries, they were promised, or they have got the illusion that so they will be able to export their agricultural products or farm products to the developed countries, and in return they will be earning huge foreign exchange reserve, fine. Because they being agricultural economy, so their potentiality of agricultural export will expand, which will definitely bring financial means benefit to them. But in reality, due to the hidden clauses in the WTO, so they are unable to export their agricultural items either on environmental issue, on issue of use of banned pesticides, on issue of use of child labor, or on the issue of sanitary and phytosanitary measures, fine. As these countries were unable to get benefit from WTO forum, being member, for which they are attracted to join. Why they are attracted to join? Because these developing and underdeveloped countries, the agrarian economy, they were attracted to join WTO on the hope that so their agrarian economy will get a boost by exporting their farm products to the developing countries in return of internationally acceptable currency, and that will enhance their foreign exchange reserve. But in reality, it never materialized. So, the conflict between the developed and developed country started from the very first conference, fine. But some consensus were reached, and some decisions were taken at the 10th conference regarding this, on agriculture and cotton issue, because cotton is a major item of export by the developing country, and that multi-fiber agreement of WTO, it is called the multi-fiber agreement. It puts some restrictions on this trade. So, issues were resolved at the 10th Ministerial Conference, fine. So, this is of benefit to both the sides, because they are able to reach a consensus to the benefit of both the developed and developing countries. The 11th conference was held in 2017 at Buenos Aires in Argentina, okay, which ended with a number of decisions on fishery. Fishery is the activity of many countries around the world, both developing and developed, okay. So, and the fishery policy, export of the fishery items or fishery products, okay, or marine products are a big concern at WTO, because there is clash of interest between the developed and developing country on the fishery policy, okay. So, they are able to reach consensus on this. Then on subsidies, what is subsidy? So, normally subsidy is a government grant to the manufacturers and the producers to make the item cheaper for the consumer. But subsidy affects international trade, because if country A gives subsidy and country B is not giving subsidy to its manufacturers, so while exporting to country C, so A is at advantage, where B will be at a disadvantage, because the cost of production for A will be cheaper, because it is utilizing the subsidy given by the government. So, the price of the product will be definitely low for country A's manufacturer as compared to the manufacturer of country B. So while exporting it to a third country, taking the example C, so A will enjoy advantage because its cost of production being low, it can sell the item at a cheaper rate, whereas the country B cannot sell the item at the same rate because its cost of production is higher than that of the country A. Fine. So subsidy in WTO has been divided into three categories. You can say, so green bucks, blue bucks and amber bucks. Fine. While green buck subsidy having no impact on the price of the product is permitted, blue buck subsidy is discouraged and amber buck subsidy is strictly prohibited under WTO. Fine. So here at the 11th conference, so they also discuss about subsidy. Okay, and what else? We'll discuss subsidy in subsequently in a more detailed manner. Fine. What else they discuss? They discuss the e-commerce duties. You see, by the 11th conference 2017, so e-commerce or commerce through using the online platform has expanded around the world, and the discussion for the the GAFA tax. Okay. Because on online trading platforms, okay, Google, Amazon, Facebook and Apple. So trading on this platform is much more than the normal trading by a country. So these multinational companies or these online aggregators, they are selling a huge amount of their products. Fine. So e-commerce duty. So what amount of taxes are to be levied on the e-commerce activity were also a major issue, because all these e-commerce companies, majority of them are multinational companies and owned by the developed countries. Fine. And their customer base is more in the developing and underdeveloped countries. Fine. So how to tax them? Because the national government in these countries, they try to impose tax on them, which they oppose, and that was dragged to the WTO, and they discussed, deliberated on this without reaching a consensus, and a commitment to continue negotiations in all areas, because the 11th Ministerial Conference was not able to reach at any consensus on these issues, but they agreed to continue the discussion on these matters in subsequent period during the future summits. So you see, 11th conference issues like fishery, subsidy and e-commerce were discussed. Fine. So this is about the 11th conference. So friends, will go to the next. Fine. So the 12th Ministerial Conference. Fine. The 12th conference was held at Geneva. Okay. So it was supposed to be held, but due to the pandemic it was delayed, and it was delayed for nearly 2 years. Okay. And it was held at Geneva headquarters. Okay. And the major outcomes of this 12th conference. Okay. So as you know that the first discussion at the 12th conference was regarding the major that curtailing harmful fishing subsidies. You see, so fishing subsidy, because fishing, as I told, it was the issue in the previous conference, because fishing activity was not only confined to the poor countries or developing countries, member countries, but also it is a major business, okay, or industry in some developed countries of the world. Fine. And the subsidy given by them, the developed countries, to their fishing industry come at a threat to or at a cost to the developing country while exporting the fishery products. Okay. So the WTO passed multilateral agreement that could curb harmful subsidy on illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing for the next 4 years to better protect global fish stock. Okay. You see, the unregulated and unreported fishing has its impact on the global fish stock, because so excess fishing activity led to a drastic fall in the marine resources, especially the fishery resources. Okay, there will be no limitation on subsidy granted or maintained by developing or least developed countries for fishing within their exclusive economic zone. You know, so fishing activity is done in the territorial water and in the exclusive economic zone. These two I think you know. So territorial water extent to is discussed at the 12th conference. There will be no limitations on subsidy granted or maintained by developing or least developed countries for fishing within their exclusive economic zone, which was somehow some limit was there for the developed countries, and the developing countries here gain some relaxation you can say on fishing activities. India and other developing countries successfully push to remove a section of the proposal that would threaten some subsidy which could assist small scale artisan fishing activity. So, artisanal and traditional farmers would not face any restrictions under this agreement. You know, many people in India and such India like country, so they are engaged in fishing activity for their livelihood, not on commercial line, but for their livelihood. Fine. Unlike some country who continue fishing on purely commercial purpose using the sophisticated technology. Okay, so they are at the target of WTO, but this relaxation given to developing countries. Okay, so they are traditional fishermen or traditional farmers. Okay, they have been they are not to face any such restrictions under this agreement. You can say this is a big achievement for country like India, whose a substantial part of whose population are into fishing activities. Fine. Okay, so next, so coming to global food security, so member agreed to a binding decision to exempt food purchased by the UN World Food Program for humanitarian purpose from any export restrictions, because so the UN food program, okay, the World Food Program procure a huge amount of food grains for providing it to the people threatened for food security. Fine. So any purchase done by the UN food program, okay, for humanitarian purpose. For which purpose? For humanitarian purpose, from any export restrictions. Okay. WTO member issue a declaration on the importance of trade in global food security and that they would avoid ban on food export. This declaration was issued in light of the global food shortage and the rising prices caused by war between Ukraine and Russia. However, country would be allowed to restrict food supply to ensure domestic food security needs. As you can see example, so country like Indonesia impose restrictions on export of edible oil. Fine. So some country impose restrictions, okay, because the emerging food security in the particular country, the country can utilize the restriction measures to save its own people, fine, in ensuring food security, fine. Then e-commerce transactions, India asked the WTO to review the extension of the moratorium on custom duty on e-commerce transactions, which include digitally traded goods and services, fine. Because you know, e-commerce activity go on increasing in the world, so this is the restrictions on that. All the members agreed to continue the moratorium on custom duty on electronic transmissions until the subsequent Ministerial Conference until March 2024, depending on whichever comes first, fine, or the either for till the 13th conference or the March 31st 2024 deadline. So by that they want to bring new laws to this, fine. Then it consists of online delivery, okay, such as music, ebooks, film, software and video games. So online trading, the electronic trading as it is called, they differ from other cross-border e-commerce since they are ordered online but not delivered physically, fine. Then comes COVID-19 vaccine production. WTO member agreed to temporarily waive intellectual property rights patent on COVID-19 vaccines without the consent of the patent holders for 5 years, so that they can more easily manufacture them domestically. As we discussed, it is the, so it is an extension or the discussion regarding what? The fourth conference, Doha, the TRIPS agreement on public health. So which one? The TRIPS agreement. On public health. Fine. So because pandemic was at its peak, so the vaccines patent was in few countries and few companies, in multinational companies. So they want a waiver. So this vaccine can be manufactured by any country giving compulsory licensing for use to save its people, fine, under health emergency. Okay. Then what else? Issues of criticism. Fishing subsidies in 2001, member states have been negotiating ban subsidies that promote overfishing. Critics argued that this agreement could only restrict and not eradicate subsidy and illegal fishing. The conditions agreed at the 12th conference was criticized on this ground. Then criticism on the e-commerce transactions. Developing country faced the brunt of the financial consequence of this moratorium. From 2017 to 2020, developing countries lost a potential tariff revenue of around 50 billion on import from only 49 digital products. So that will be big loss for them, and this will continue in future also, because no such clear-cut provisions was made at the conference. Fine. Then critics argue that regarding the COVID-19 vaccine, that the current agreement is a watered down version of the original proposal made by the India and South Africa in 2020 that wanted broader intellectual property waivers on vaccines, treatment and test. It also criticized for not covering all medical tools like diagnostics and treatment. Only vaccine was discussed at the summit. So apart from the vaccines, there are other things like medical tools like diagnostic kits, treatment, etc. were not covered under the TRIPS agreement on public health in the ongoing pandemic. Only the vaccine was discussed. And whatever Indian concern, a permanent solution on public stockholding of food grains was not discussed at the 12th Ministerial Conference. This is relating to the Indian Food Security Act and the AOA versus National Food Security Act of India. The issue is virtually important for India as it had to secure its right to continue its food subsidy program, notwithstanding the restrictions imposed by the agreement on agriculture, as you discussed. So there is no discussion on this, and India is still now using the peace clause to overcome this. Another critical issue for India is that it is not allowed to export food grains for public health stock. As India's export of food grains have increased, several WTO members have questioned whether grain from the publicly held stocks are being exported or it is exported from the market at the market rate, because government procure at the government rate and held in the public stock and with subsidy. So whether government of India is exporting the items from that particular public stock or exporting it from the collecting the market. It was not made very clear by India, so it was criticized. India has asked the WTO to review the extension of the moratorium on custom on e-commerce transactions, which include digitally traded goods and services. Fine. So these are the concerns raised by India at the 12th Ministerial Conference, okay, which was the latest in the series. Okay. So this raised the issue that most of the members, okay, so we are against means there is a schism between the developing countries, and the developing country led by India are putting in some efforts to reach at some agreement which will be beneficial for the developing countries. Fine. So in the next session we will discuss the MCQs regarding WTO from the beginning till the 12th Ministerial Conference. Fine. So thank you for watching this session, and keep on watching it regularly to update on different topics with the questions and the MCQs. Thank you.